Turning our attention to something you might think is a little lighter, asking really interesting questions about God. Does he have something like what we think of as a sense of humour? Some people have been concerned as they've scoured the Gospels and they've found no trace of Jesus laughing. So what does this mean about Jesus? What does it mean about God? Because there's references to God laughing. What do we take seriously and what can we be light-hearted about as Christian believers? Well, Bill Muehlenberg has been thinking through these issues this past week. He's written an article called God, Jesus and Laughter. Bill's back with us. Hey, Bill, welcome back to 2020.
Always good to be here.
Bill, because there's not as many references to Jesus and the disciples having a great old party time, does it mean that he never laughed?
Yeah, well, good question. When you say not many, when you refer to Jesus, there's none. Actually,
Okay.
as far as I can tell, in the Gospels, there are no records of Jesus laughing, telling jokes, goofing around, having a gay old time. But of course, we all know that you have to be careful about arguing from silence. Does that mean Jesus never laughed, never had a good time with his disciples, and so on? I don't think we can necessarily say that. But it's just interesting for what it's worth. What we do have in the gospel accounts, we don't have a record of that happening. Now, I posted something like this on the social media, and I got into a bit of debate and discussion, and some people think, well, God laughed, and we can laugh, and we're made in God's image, so obviously God must laugh, and so on. And again, I didn't mean this to go into a weird direction. Sure, of course, we can have a good time, we can enjoy life, we can have hobbies, sports, recreation, go to a movie, maybe watch a movie. I like the old Marx Brothers movies, right? A lot of good humor and comedy. So I'm certainly not saying we shouldn't have fun, laugh here and there. I guess what I was trying to do is balance that with the idea that we live in a fallen world. There's a lot of needy people. We should probably, in short, take God a lot more seriously than we do, while at the same time perhaps taking ourselves a bit less seriously. But, Paul, Peter, and others talk about we need to be sober-minded in this age. So that's kind of the whole direction where I ended up taking this whole article in.
Well, we all like to have a laugh. And as you say, created in the image and likeness of God, we might assume that God's got a sense of humour because he's given to us a sense of humour. And so when we don't see those instances of Jesus laughing in the gospel, that might tell us something even deeper too, that God's not actually wanting to be a comedian. He doesn't want to identify as being just flippant and loose and laughing. There might be something serious that is being conveyed. Thoughts here?
Yeah, well, again, it's getting that biblical balance right. The idea of God using humor, well, in one sense, he certainly did, right? The Bible is full of types of humor as figures of speech. We have satire, ridicule. Things people say, oh, Jesus would, well, Jesus was like this as well, where you sometimes make fun of somebody and at least their worldview and their practices. You can think of Elijah, right? Criticizing the prophets of Baal and, making fun. Wow, maybe your God is out relieving himself. Why doesn't he act? So that was a clear case of kind of satirical and, taking a dig with a bit of humor. You get that a lot in the prophets. Jesus would have done it. You have even the disciples. So that's certainly there. It's just this issue of how much kind of, being jocular and goofing around and lighthearted all the time, which actually the New Testament tends to warn about. And again, the idea of being sober-minded, the days are evil. So again, getting that mix right. Somebody did tell me that in the Facebook thing. Oh, yeah, but we're made in God's image. We laugh, so God laughs. And I said, well, yeah, yes and no. You can only go so far with that. We, of course, drive cars. We have accidents. We get constipation, right? Just because we do things and we're made in God's image doesn't necessarily mean God does the identical things, but yeah, I took her point, and so it's just trying to get this right mix here between not being an old sourpuss on the one hand, but not being way too flippant and cavalier given the kind of a serious life that we live in now.
And when you're looking at the gospel accounts and you don't find instances of Jesus having a belly laugh, that doesn't mean that that's not God overall, because we know Jesus as the God-man. He is God. And there are instances of God laughing in the Old Testament, but it's not necessarily laughing in the way that you and I might think is having a fun old time.
Yeah. Well, quite right. And as I say, with the social media posts, a number of people said, yeah, but God laughed. And Jesus is God, so there you go. Jesus must have laughed. So actually, it's not too hard, as I wrote in my piece. You can go through and find every instance in the Old Testament of God laughing. And of interest, there's only 4 altogether. I list them all in my article, plus context. And for what it's worth, all 4 of these cases of God laughing, every one of them has to do with God really mocking, ridiculing, using derision and satire, if you will, about evil people, right? God laughs from heaven. Why do the nations rage and so on? And so, yeah, we have 4 instances of God laughing, but it's, at least in those cases, more of a, this is, hey, you guys, you got something coming to you. You shouldn't be such wise guys. The unbelieving, the pagan, God just kind of sits in heaven and laughs and mocks these people with their pretensions of being able to stand against God and so on. So you're limited when we hear about God laughing in this kind of context. But again, it's not to say that, right? Does God have a sense of humor? Is there humor amongst the Trinity? Again, we don't want to argue from silence. We'll probably find out in the next life. But yeah, we just, again, the extremes, as always, avoiding the extremes. We don't want a false kind of Puritanism where everybody is dour and miserable. But we don't want to be just goofing around all the time, given that, people are dying around us, heading to a lost eternity. We have so many things in the culture wars, right? We need to take serious. So again, just trying to get a little bit of balance here as to what Scripture says.
So God, when he laughs in those 4 instances in the Old Testament, more of a mocking laughter in the sense, it's not a belly laugh, it's not a party laugh.
Yeah.
But then we say, what is the Christian to be like? Should we be like God and mock those things that are evil? What is the Christian to be like? Like Jesus, but there's no instances of laughing. How do you see this, Bill?
Well, again, we're not saying Jesus never laughed. We're not saying a Christian should never laugh. As to imitating God in mockery, well, we already mentioned, right? Elijah is just one case. He mocked the prophets of Baal. Jesus, you could say, used various types of strong language, certainly with the scribes and Pharisees. Paul, reading the book of Acts or in his epistles, could use quite strong language, whether satire, ridicule, mockery. So it seems there is a place for that. Sure, we don't want to, make it our only way of communicating. You want to love your non-Christian neighbor, deal with them. But sometimes bad ideas, at least, deserve to be called out, right? We may not say mock the person, but really bad, dumb ideas, in fact, harmful, dangerous ideas, they should be called out. And maybe we should mock them, deride them, and show them for what they are, really dangerous and unhelpful ideas. So maybe that distinction between, how we deal with the person, but deal with his bad worldview or philosophy or ideas, that might be a different kettle of fish.
Bill, what do we do with that word joy? Because there are joyful instances. Is joy equivalent to laughing, or is it just a sense of well-being, of safety, of security, of knowing that God has your back? How do you see that?
No, another good question. And another piece I recently did kind of touched on that very issue. I talked about the paradoxes of Christianity, right? I had said, Jesus promised a life of hardship and the discipleship, right? Taking up your cross, denying yourself. And a few people wrote back saying, "Oh, you sound like you want to be miserable, and it's a hard life to be a Christian." I said, "Well, in one sense, it is." But yeah, on the other hand, we have joy, which the Holy Spirit gives us. And then I mentioned a number of interesting, if paradoxical texts, right, where Paul especially will talk about suffering in the same verse as he talks about joy, right? Or James or others. Count it all joy, when you go through suffering or trials and so on. So here we got this funny mixed. We can have real spirit-given joy, yet in the midst of real hardship and suffering. So again, the joy of the Lord is probably different from the joy of the world, where again, that's more of a jocular, just have fun, just try to make a joke of everything. That's not the biblical joy, but yeah, there's a deep down inner joy that God gives us, even in spite of our circumstances.
I imagine those that mock Christians, sometimes with that view of, looking like you've been sucking lemons, that sort of interesting way that sometimes there's been a caricature of maybe Christian leaders.
Yeah.
And while we might open the scriptures and not expect there to be comedy, belly laughter, I imagine here we might be talking about the way that God has, and I know you mentioned these words, sober-mindedness. There's a certain sense in which when you actually are engaging with God, engaging with the scriptures, engaging with meaning and purpose and mission, that there is a sober-mindedness that's necessary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, just look at all the encounters in the Bible when people meet God, right? What is the number one thing they do? They don't start cracking jokes. They don't have a good time. Hey, buddy, how's it going? Just about every time, right? They fall flat on their face in a bit of holy fear, right? God is not somebody to be trifled with. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Sure, we can have enjoyment with God, but we also are not flippant about God or take him lightly. He is God. He's holy. He's 100% pure and righteous. So we have to have a little sense of kind of awe, proper respect for who God is. I guess the same with a young child and a parent, right? You can have fun with your parents, but still, they are your parents. They do deserve a certain amount of respect and dignity as well. So, again, finding that balance always in so many areas, the Christian has to get the biblical balance, avoid the extremes, and if we can all aim in that direction, that's probably a helpful thing.
A wonderful balance, because there are so many people, aren't there, that live to laugh. The only joy in their life is that they pursue some level of laughter. A lot of Christians will be in that boat, and the encouragement there is to actually be sober-minded too when it comes to the things of God. Love your thoughts on balance, Bill. And I'll point listeners to this, one of the latest articles that you've written called God, Jesus and Laughter. You might be wondering about laughing as a Christian believer, and you might be looking for permission to do so. You might also be looking for that encouragement to be sober-minded and be serious about the things of God. Bill Muehlenberg, let me point listeners to just simply Google Culture Watch, one word, or go to billmuehlenberg.com. Bill, thanks for another great update today on 2020.
Always a pleasure.